Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you are listening to episode number 16. Today we are joined by Dan Enfalt, big buck serial killer. Dan's going to share how to hunt mature buck bedding on high-pressured public land and share a great stalking story of how he tagged out on a Wisconsin monster. All right, welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 16, where today we are joined by Dan Enfalt. Really looking forward to having a conversation with Dan. Of course, he is known across the whitetail landscape as the big buck serial killer. He gains that name honestly. He does it obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but he does it on typically public land that is very high pressure. So the fact that he's able to take the type of animals that he's been taking over the course of his hunting career and those type of elements speaks to his ability to get after a whitetail and kind of think through things strategically and put himself in good positions to try to make to make good shots and make kill shots. And he's got a wall of mounts to show for it. But before we get to dialing Dan in and starting that conversation, as usual, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Phil Marchuk. How's it going, man?
It's going. It's busy. A lot of things going on this end. But you know, it's pretty typical from week to week anyway. So when are you not busy?
Yeah, I hear that. It's man, I'll tell you what. The Christmas break, trying to roll back into work mode. That's
spoiled.
Yeah. You know, I think we're both kind of in the same boat, but you know, where I work closes down for the week in between every year, so I get that nice kind of break off. So this year, you know, with the holiday, the Christmas holiday being on a Sunday, of course you get that weekend plus the whole week, and then the following weekend. So it was a nice.
You guys had Monday too, didn't you? After New Year's. Yeah,
we did have Monday after New Year's too. That was an observed holiday, so that was it was a nice break. It made it pretty difficult to get back. So I've been struggling trying to get into the routine. But you're busy on all kinds of fronts, man. You got all kinds of crazy going on at your house.
Oh man, yeah, we're about 6 weeks until the baby's due. We're breaking ground on the basement reno in a couple days. In fact, I was just wrapping up cleaning out my gun safe because I'm gonna send pretty much all my firearms back up to my folks. You know, the safe's not leaving the garage, so I don't want to leave the guns in there either. But
right.
Definitely don't want to have them here unlocked as well, so I'm gonna put them back up with my folks for a little bit until the reno's done. Yeah.
I know we have a little bit of catching up to do, man, because we haven't really. I was just thinking before we jumped on, we haven't really spoke a lot really, and since the holiday. Like I don't think we've put out a podcast where the two of us have actually been on the podcast at the same time.
Do you smell that? I smell something.
What's that?
I think I smell an Us podcast coming up.
I think there very well could be an Us podcast in the very near future. We got some things to talk about.
Wait a second, we're just gonna see our numbers drastically drop now because we said.
Actually, yeah, for sure. It's like the downloads have been growing until we get to that one. Then they taper off quite a bit. I've been busy with, of course, getting back in the swing of things with work, and but I know we had to delay us jumping on the podcast here this afternoon because my daughter is now fully entrenched in basketball, in elementary school basketball, which is let's call it painful.
I want to hear about this because you mentioned the basketball thing before when I texted you earlier saying that asking when we're gonna do this, and you said, "Well, I'm at Anna's basketball game right now," and I'm like, I got to hear more about this.
Yeah, so she likes all sports for the most part. She just likes to be active, which is great. Which, you know, I'm happy that she enjoys that type of stuff.
For sure, totally.
But let's just say, you know, my wife and I are both, you know, what you would call vertically challenged. So
hey, preaching to the choir, brother.
Yeah, I know, right? So I don't think basketball is in her future in a big way. Now,
listen, there's a Muggsy Bogues in all of us.
Right.
Okay?
Now, well, the saving grace is this, right? So my wife Megan, her dad, my father-in-law, who I do a lot of hunting with and spend a lot of time with, he is a basketball coach, has been. He retired from coaching, I think 2, maybe 3 years ago. So I want to say he's probably coached basketball for 40 plus years. Yeah. And, in our area growing up, like he held the record for the most points scored in the county for a bunch of years. And this was even prior to like the 3-point line being instituted. And he's vertically challenged. So his was all, jump shots. So he probably would have extended that points total if they actually had a 3-point line. I'm pretty sure he actually played whenever they had a peach basket at each end without
and a rock
and a rock. Yeah.
Dribbling was extensively hard.
Yeah. But so the first game was last week, and we don't watch basketball at the house. I'm not a huge basketball fan. It's like I watch, I'm a big NFL football fan, when I'm not, in the whitetail woods on the weekends. It's like I'm usually watching.
We watch Steelers, Penguins, and Pirates. That's it.
Right, pretty much. And I do watch a little college football, but I don't watch nearly as much as I used to. And, the other sport that I really follow a lot is college wrestling, because I grew up wrestling, so I usually follow Penn State pretty closely. So we don't really ever have basketball in the house. And so it's one of those things where she went to start playing basketball just because, she knows her grandpa coached basketball and stuff like that, and so she wanted to try it, and so she went to try it, and it's like I'm watching her play her first game. Like I went to like a practice or two and was watching her, and they're just going through like drills and stuff like that, teaching them how to dribble and shoot and all that kind of stuff. And you get to a game where like the concept of the game kind of comes into play, right? Like the theory of the game, like this is how it's played. There's offense, there's defense, and you're guarding, and it's transitions and stuff like that. And it was really clear that we've never had a basketball game on in our house because the concept of offense and defense was completely lost on her, to where, she was guarding the girl who was guarding her whenever her team had the ball. So nice. It was like she just played defense the whole time, which her defense is pretty solid. Like she's small and scrappy.
Listen, did she block her own teammate's shot?
No, usually when they were on offense, like she was like out, like, what you would call like the wing, but in elementary school basketball, everyone is around the ball, which is right underneath the rim. So she was open.
Yeah, it's kind of like soccer.
Yeah,
up until a certain age group, right?
Yeah. We also had
a group of kids following the ball wherever it goes.
Yeah. We had our time with soccer. So I was familiar with that. So, my wife being the great parent that she is, she decided to take Anna to a couple local, our school district girls high school basketball games and have Anna kind of watch just so she could kind of see how the game's played. And today it was like a light went off. She actually shot a basket, didn't make it. She missed, but that was okay. And she actually had a rebound, and she actually, got the ball a couple times and dribbled up the court. She actually is really good dribbling and has good, good handle, if you will.
Nice.
And passed, and she's
quick learner.
She's pretty good at passing, and she actually had an assist tonight. So today was like a complete turnaround where I was like, oh wow, she actually understands the concept of the game now, which is kind of cool.
Boom.
Yeah. So that's been, what I've been kind of busy with, but how was your Christmas, man? What was did you get anything interesting hunting related? Did you get
actually I did so I did get just generally I got a bunch of Cabela's gift cards, which was intentional.
Yeah.
I people are asking me, and I'm like, I don't want to get super specific with people, so Cabela's gift cards is pretty legit, and it allows me to get what I need to get. But I did get one thing that was very specific. It's for my Remington 700. I have a 308, and it's my primary deer rifle. And I got a Timney adjustable 2-stage trigger. Nice. Yeah.
Look at you, all fancy.
It breaks like none other. It's awesome.
Nice.
I've done a couple dry fires just to give it a quick roll. I haven't shot it yet, but I am excited about it.
Nice. Yeah. I usually kind of follow the same suit. Like I don't get real specific, and if folks get me some gift cards, they kind of know that that's what it is that I want. I did get one really cool gift. So like I'm a terrible gift giver, like by nature, like I'm terrible at it. Like for my wife's birthday this year, I rut hunted in Ohio. That was my gift. So like if you basically gave her the gift of
of leaving her alone.
Pretty much, yeah. That's how I looked at it.
It's not bad. I mean, it could be worse.
We had very different views on whether or not that was a good gift or not. So
I could probably see where those views would come into play here.
Right. So I'm just not a great gift giver. So, for Christmas, my wife gets the usual mom/wife gift, of like some type of like spa treatment, massage, nice comfortable robes, some nice organic and natural teas and, stuff like that she likes. But it's like, I don't go too far outside the box, My wife, on the other hand, is like one of the best gift givers of like all time. Like
you totally married up, dude.
Yeah. She, and it's not necessarily from like a monetary value point of view. Like she just gives very meaningful and thoughtful gifts where she really knows the person that she's gifting. And it's like in whatever she gives them, it's like, it's full of meaning. And, just like sincerity. And like, for me, it's like, what's the dollar range? $25 to $75. I spent $75. Here you go. Like that's that's kind of my approach. So what she got me was probably one of the best gifts I've ever gotten. So there was an article that I wrote, and I think it's called The First Hunt.
Oh, I know. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So it was an article that I wrote right after I took Anna on her first legit hunting outing, and I took her out for a spring gobbler hunt last year, and it was right at the end of May because we had terrible weather like most of turkey season last year, and it was just hard to get her out because I didn't want it to be wet or cold, and I didn't want her to have a miserable time. I wanted her to enjoy it so she'd want to continue to do it. So it was the very last weekend of turkey season that actually was a good weekend to go out. The weather was good. It was a little warm, but the morning wasn't too bad. And I wrote this article about it, and I think it came out in like June, 2016, I think is whenever I put it out, if I'm not mistaken. And it was one of those things where I started writing it really from the perspective of taking Anna on her first hunt. But then it started, as I was writing it, I started thinking about like the first hunts that I went on with my dad and like how meaningful it was, to me years later that he took the time to kind of teach me about hunting and bestow that hunting heritage, or pass it down to me and so forth.
Right.
And it's one of those articles that you write where, I look back at it and I'm like, I'm really proud of the article that I wrote because it's full of meaning. There's no hunting strategy. It's nothing it's just really me writing a meaningful article about my experiences with my daughter and then reminiscing about my experiences with my father.
Right.
And
passing down pastime tradition.
Right. So, my wife being the great gift giver that she is, knew that article meant a lot to me. So she actually took that article and she sent it to an artist that she found and had him scribe 2 large pieces of wood, and burn the entire article into the wood with an awesome scene at the bottom of it of like elk and deer and just like a wildlife scene, and gave that to me for Christmas.
That's awesome.
And it was pretty awesome. Great gift. One of my favorite things that I've ever gotten. So yeah, she's a great giver, and I am not. That is the moral of the story there.
Yeah, she totally blew my gift out of the water. So.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna say, I'm actually partaking of the gift that you gave me, which is a bottle of Pittsburgh's finest Weigel bourbon. So thank you. Your gift is coming. We've just not seen each other since Christmas.
Well, we'll rectify that very soon.
Yeah, because the other topic is like during Christmas, one of my favorite parts of Christmas is the fact that I have a nice chunk of time off from work. So it actually lets me have an opportunity to go out and do a fair amount of late season hunting, which was nice. So I got out 3 days for late season, and actually saw a couple shooters, man, which was really cool on the family farm. I think I hunted 3 hunts on that farm all year prior to that, because most of my time was spent in Ohio during
for your wife's birthday, right?
For my wife's birthday, yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Let's go ahead and make sure we twist the knife a little more there.
I tell you, when we all get together again, I'm gonna bring that up. Like we'll be a couple of whiskeys deep, and I'll be like, "Oh, Megan, how was your birthday?"
Yeah, it was awesome. I saw some bucks sparring on your birthday. It was killer. But the hunts were good at the farm here for late season, which I've always said, like, late season for whatever reason is one of my favorite times to hunt, because especially at the farm, there's nobody there usually.
Right.
So I have free reign, and it's just enough time after rifle season has been out that the deer start slowly showing back up. Mm-hmm. And and that was the case this year. It's like I showed up and there was a spot I was kind of scoping. I put a new food plot in last year that was mainly focused on, there was some power plant that had some soybeans and stuff. And I've explained this in an earlier podcast. That was kind of a menagerie of, summer and early season food. And then I did an overseed of turnips, which, obviously was going to pay dividends once the cold hit and the tops, the sugar went to the tops and the deer ate those off. But then in late season, it was really all about the bulbs that were still in the ground, and the last source of food available. And so it was really one of the only easy access food sources in the area because all the other farmers' crops are off and the rest of everything else is clover and alfalfa around us as far as what we have as a food plot and what the adjacent farmers have. So we really had the only late season food source around. So I kind of set up next to some thick stuff off that food source. And what I thought was going to happen happened. I had a herd, a crew of deer roll through like right before dark, which is what I kind of anticipated. And I saw 8 deer. Was it the first night? No, the first night I sat off of a different food source the first night and I saw 8 deer, but they were all not close enough. And they were close enough I could see that they were all does, so nothing that night. And then I moved locations the second night against this other food source that had the turnips in it and stuff. And I saw 8 deer come through. Of those 8, 4 were bucks, and of those 4, 2 were for sure shooters. One was pretty nice for the area, at least, for Pennsylvania. And then I kind of set up higher up on this ridge top. Or I guess it wasn't a ridge top really. It's just like there's a deep cut in between these. I guess you could call them ridges, but it's the fields all in this area on our farm kind of sit up high, and then and then there's valleys like kind of down below all the fields. And so I was sitting off like down and kind of off one of the edges of the fields where I couldn't see into the field, but I wasn't at the hollow floor necessarily. Kind of doing an observation set because a lot of the deer like to run that bottom of that hollow up. And toward those food sources up there. So I sat up far enough to where I could just kind of do an observation set so I didn't get blown out, and just to kind of see if what I thought was true, and it was, and they were using it. So the next day I went in and moved my stand probably about 40, 50 yards closer. And then wouldn't you know it, they came up above me that night. Yeah. So as
luck would have it.
Yeah. They pulled the old switcheroo on me, but you
zigged when you should have zagged.
Yeah. But the moral of the story really for me was that, the food source is obviously working. So that was good news. And I was understanding how they were using that area and where they typically would come out. Next year, just be more of a tweak to where I would potentially set up if I were going to hunt that late season again. But, I was just excited that I saw a shooter because, to be honest, I think, between my father-in-law and a couple of his buddies that hunted a lot of through October, November, and then even into rifle season, I want to say they may have only seen between all the guys that hunted it, maybe 3 shooters the entire year. And I went in one evening and saw 2.
That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
So I was happy with that, but I know you and I actually have a late season hunt coming up here in a couple of days together.
Yes, sir. Super excited about it, and I think we're hinting back again to the Us podcast drop, but
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, because we'll definitely have to do an Us podcast, here where we talk about, looking back on 2016 and then what we want to do for 2017, maybe some things that we've learned and stuff like that. But we'll definitely be dropping that. But I'm definitely looking forward to heading out to your neck of the woods and getting some timber time with you, my friend. It's been a long time coming.
I'll tell you what. I guess the last 2 seasons it's been archery only second season in my WMU. But prior to that, they actually allowed rifle in second season for doe only.
Wow.
So if you filled your buck tag, but you still need to put a little bit more in the freezer, you go back out rifle for almost a month. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, this year, out of the times that I've been up there in that area hunting, I never went a sit without seeing something. Now I've seen total probably 3 shooters over this season. One was the one that kind of got away. you know, we'll talk about that in the reflection podcast.
Right.
But the other two certainly were pretty decent sized too. But yeah, definitely excited to get out, especially this time of year when, you know, as you said, things kind of calm down a little bit, and hopefully, you know, you don't see deer feeling and acting as pressured as they typically are during rifle.
Right. That, and it's just nice to get out. Like, it's the this will probably,
generally speaking, of course.
Yeah, this will probably be my last hunt, I would imagine. I don't know that I'll get out anymore this year. And for those that are listening here in the eastern part of the state, there's a few WMUs who, you know, extend hunting season, you know, deer hunting season out till I think the 29th or like the very end of January.
Yeah,
I know back at our farm,
last weekend of January.
Yeah, I know back on our farm, it's been out. It's been done for a week. I think last Saturday was the last. I think roughly a week ago was the last day you could hunt. So I think with that, I know, you know, we have Dan coming on, and I'm super stoked to talk to him.
It's gonna be awesome.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to talking to Dan. So I think, you know, before we jump into any other topics, I think I have one more thing to share before we get Dan on the line. I just want to give everyone a heads up, or a, you know, big announcement, so to say. I'm happy to announce that this Truth from the Stand podcast will be partnering with Whitetail Institute of North America. So I'm super stoked to be working with those guys. I've used a bunch of their stuff in the past, you know, for my food plots and stuff, and their customer service couldn't be better. They've, especially when we first got started in our food plotting, you know, we placed a lot of phone calls with those guys to make sure that we were doing the right things and we were kind of doing what we needed to do to try to have a successful plot and stuff like that. And they're just some of the nicest dudes you'll meet in the industry. So it was kind of a no-brainer whenever the opportunity came up to work together, you know. And I also thought that just from, you know, it's one of those things where sometimes food plotting can be a little bit of a daunting task. You know, you think it's a lot harder than maybe it is. And so it'll be great to be able to partner with them to hopefully bring some interesting content, to everyone out there listening, to bring some content your way to kind of help, spread some information and, you know, education, if you will, about food plotting, what it takes, how to do it, and how to approach it to set yourself up for success. So overall, I'm just really, really excited to be working with those guys, and keep your ears peeled for some Whitetail Institute of North America information coming to a podcast near you soon.
Knowledge is power.
Yes, absolutely. So with that said, without further ado, let's go ahead and get Dan on the line. But before we get Dan on the line, let's take a quick break to hear a word about our partners at Exodus Outdoor Gear. Archery hunting often can be a humbling experience. I think we can all attest to that. But today we hear from Exodus customer Chris Affelstat and about how he, with the help of Exodus trail cameras, went from being humbled to an incredible first buck harvest with a bow.
It's been 4 years of bow hunting with zero success. I guess zero harvest up to this point, because there was success and I learned a ton of lessons along the way. But this year, opening day, I got my first doe of my life with a bow, which was awesome. And I got it right in front of my trail camera, my Exodus camera. So that was really cool. And then 2 weeks later, on my third hunt of the year, I put down, I passed on a really nice 8-point, which would have been a great first buck of my life. I've never even killed a buck with a gun because I knew this big guy was there. And 10 minutes later, put down, you know, 160 class buck, and was super, super stoked. So my season ended pretty quick.
And that, my friends, is an Exodus experience. Congrats to Chris on a great buck, and I'm sure that story will be told for many years to come. And if you'd like to learn more about Exodus trail cameras, visit them at exodusoutdoorgear.com. And now back to the show. All right, we are back, and we are joined by Dan Enfalt. I have to say that I've been looking forward to this podcast for a little while. I'm sure a lot of you listening at home are aware of Dan and his many offerings. He runs, of course, the huntingbeast.com, his website. He's written, you know, articles for a lot of different publications talking about a wide variety of hunting tactics and strategies, and of course it has appeared on different, you know, various podcasts, and, you know, his YouTube channel with his video video content is something to be checked out as well. So I've kind of followed Dan for a little while as far as his writings and his YouTube content is concerned. So I'm really excited to have him join us today. So how you doing, Dan? How are things going?
Pretty good.
Good. So, have you been getting a little bit of cold weather here recently? Snapping out of the warm weather we've been getting used to the past couple years?
Yeah, we had a nice little cold spell there for a while.
Yeah, I know we had one here. I guess the past week, my turnip plots actually at our family farm actually got some use. They weren't getting much use up until the past week or so, but the deer are at least getting some victuals, at least using all the work that I put in and lost a few layers of skin from the sunburn that I got this summer. So at least it wasn't for nothing. But so Dan, I know that a lot of the folks out there listening are, of course, I'm sure have heard of you in some capacity, some way, shape, or form. But for those who may not be as familiar with you, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a little bit of background about yourself, where you're from, what you do professionally, and and then specifically what you kind of do in your approach to the whitetail world.
I'm kind of a different cat, I guess.
Perfect.
I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin, and I've been here my whole life. I've traveled around a little bit hunting and helping people with their properties across most of the lower states. So I've got some background in hunting, but I've never really seeked out the professionalism thing. I've never went after the big time or anything. I've just gotten well known from the stuff I've been killing, and because I put out some informational videos that really took off. And I've been on some TV shows and, like you said, been in some articles and books and stuff, and word seems to be spreading.
Yeah. No, it's. I remember the first time that I was introduced to you. I got to say, it was the nickname, and I don't know. I'll mention it, and you can tell me if you like it or if you don't like it. But it's. In my opinion, it's the best nickname that I've heard in the outdoor world. It's Dan Enfalt, Big Buck Serial Killer. And I was like, if you're going to be nicknamed something, that is like the absolute perfect nickname for a guy who seems to get it done with regularity. So, I mean, is it fair to say that you're I don't want to use the word expertise because I know everybody kind of gets funny about being, called an expert or, I guess let me put it this way. Is it fair to say that your area of the most knowledge, I guess, that you have, or your approach that you probably are most known for is really your strategies for going after mature deer on highly pressured land, most of it being of the public variety, but I know that you also spend a little bit of time on private as well. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I kind of, like the public land thing. I get offers on outfitted hunts and stuff all the time, and most of the time I just turn them down. It might sound weird, but to me it's not about shooting the biggest buck or having bragging rights or anything. I like to go onto land where anybody can go and come out the victor. I think there's something about that equal playing field. And if you look out at the world today, I mean, everybody seems to be in competition, to shoot the biggest bucks and stuff. And really, it's not a competition. If it is, the rich guy wins. It's really, you can buy bucks, you can farm them, you can do anything nowadays. And, I know guys like my friend Andre D'Acquisto has a ranch in Iowa, and I hunted his ranch for 10 days, and in 10 days I had a 150-inch buck walk past me every day. I mean, you can't take a guy hunting on a ranch like that and compare that to public land hunting. So for me, I mean, it's about, if you're going to go and you're going to say, hey, I know something about hunting and I'm going to show you how to do something. You can't really do that if you're hunting some managed farm and the guys you're talking to are hunting public land. In a lot of cases, I think these guys hunting the public land who aren't getting it done are probably better hunters than the guys on those ranches who are,
right.
Yeah. And that's why I kind of really like that public land thing. And there's something about the pride of hunting down a big buck on land where there's a lot of people out there hunting for that buck,
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. I mean, I've mentioned this, in the past on the podcast here. It's, I grew up in Pennsylvania. Phil and I are both from PA. We always had a small tract of land growing up. My dad did, and then some of my grandparents did. So I hunted predominantly on, family land for the most part. My dad and I would venture off every now and then on some private, or on some public land. And we have a family farm that I spent some time doing some habitat management and stuff like that. And this year, I just was really intrigued to go to Ohio because I'd never been to Ohio whitetail hunting. I'd been out of state to Alaska for some different hunts, but I'd never hunted whitetail out of state. And so I went on an Ohio public land hunting trip this November, and arrowed the biggest buck I've ever arrowed. Killed the biggest buck I've ever killed. It was my first buck with a bow. I've killed does and stuff in the past, but it was my first buck with a bow. And you're right, man. The sense of pride that I had from taking that deer, because I had to work for it. There wasn't any. I had to go in and read sign. And honestly, I read up on some of your articles and went on the huntingbeast.com and followed some of the folks on there in the forum and got some just reading through and getting some tips and stuff. And there was definitely a sense of pride of knowing that I got it done in an area that's a challenge that not everybody does. There were plenty of guys coming back to camp just saying that they weren't seeing deer, and I was run over with them, and I had great opportunities. So I think it's weird because I think that the conversation's even shifting that way a little bit as I listen to people talk and just listen to some of the chatter on social. I think that there's starting to be a little bit more of an affinity for public land hunting than there was maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, I do. I've seen it coming for years. There was a big trend. I grew up in a time when it was public hunting, so I've seen the trend go from, from the public land to all of a sudden the deer farming thing.
Right.
And now it seems to be, like you said, going back, and it seems to be like a lot of hunters actually seem to have a resentment towards people that have huge tracts of managed land, which isn't right either. I mean, everybody has their thing and they can do their, what they want.
Right.
But it has kind of like flipped. You're right. And it seems to be going, a lot faster now in that direction. Correct.
Right. And I think it's some good work doing. It's funny because we recently spoke with Aaron Warburton from Midwest Whitetail, and he actually mentioned some tactics that he learned from you actually. And I know that he does a lot of public hunting land in Iowa, and that's a lot of what he films specifically. And I think it's nice to see some of those folks that are, larger in the industry, like the Midwest, like Bill Winke's crew, that are focusing some of their efforts on public land and bringing that kind of story to the masses, if you will. But I do want to dive into some specifics here because, we have you, of course, and you have a lot of information you can share that I think will help a lot of folks out there that do focus on public hunting, whether it's something that they focus on because it's what they want to do or if they focus on it because it's what they have to do. So I did want to jump into just, some topics about public land and kind of your strategy and your approach. And the first thing I wanted to ask you is I think sometimes people are challenged with how to understand how to start, I guess. So I guess the first thing I want to kind of tee up with you is when you're looking to go on a hunt and say it's in an area that maybe you're not 100% familiar with, how are you choosing that piece of public land to hunt? Like what tools or tactics or scouting approach are you using to like qualify the parcel of land, if you will, to say, this is a good piece of land versus I don't think this would be a great piece of land? Can you kind of give us kind of like a walk through your brain, if you will, of how you qualify a piece of land that you're going to potentially hunt?
Sure. The first thing that's ringing in my mind when you're saying that is there's differences in terrain and such. I might go attack something in hill country different than I attack something in, swampland. Like if I go out into hill country in like western Wisconsin or Iowa or something, what I'm really looking for is areas that are known for big bucks, that got low hunter pressure, and maybe I'm looking for, I might talk to the biologist in the area and find out if there's any new properties that opened. That's always a cool thing to start with too. But really what I'm looking for is properties that are nowhere near camping, nowhere near town, nowhere where somebody's going to stay in motels and stuff, in farming areas. And the reason is all those farmers and the people who live around those farms hunt those farms. The public land doesn't get hit that hard. Usually public land gets hit by city folks, guys that come from the towns. Not necessarily cities, but towns. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So the further away you get from town, the less likely you're going to have pressure. And then I'm seeking out properties that, in that terrain, that, got some uniqueness to them. Is there no parking lot? Is there hidden access? Do you have to cross a river before you can even get to the hill country spot? Those things are crossing my mind. So I'm looking for hard access. I'm looking for things that are overlooked, and I'm looking for things that are ways away from people, and that's what I'm doing on a travel trip in hill country. Now, if I'm looking at swampland or farmland or whatever, like around my home area. It's kind of flat, a little bit of roll to it. It's mostly farming. I'm looking for wet stuff. There's a lot of hunting pressure here. So I'm looking for wet stuff because the bucks are going to use water for cover. And I'm looking for dense swamps and stuff. And another reason for that is all the gun hunters will do drives. They'll do pushes. They'll cover every inch of dry land, and they'll kill everything. You know, when you look around my area, where I live, we've got a lot of hunting pressure here, probably the most in the state. And you can drive around on opening day and you see orange everywhere. But where you don't see it is out in those cattail marshes in the water or in the swamps. And those bucks gravitate to there. And I'm going out into those spots where nobody wants to go, basically. You know?
Right. So the one thing I've heard you mention in the past, and I definitely wanted to bring this up, and I think this is a good place to do it. And so there's places where you don't want to go, and you talked about hard access. And you know, my hunt this year in Ohio was living proof of that, where it kind of fell in line with some of the things I heard you say in you know, at different times, which was the access was hard because it was straight up a really nasty climb through nasty stuff that no one wanted to go through, but it wasn't all that far away from a road necessarily. You know, and I've heard you talk about before of like looking at those pockets where people were going to overlook because they would never think a buck would bed or be living in that area. Can you talk about those areas and kind of how you find those and what those might look like?
No, when you were hunting in Ohio, you're hunting the hilly stuff, right?
Right. Yeah. Correct.
The hilly area. Now, in the hilly areas like that, a lot of time, you know, you'll have certain accesses, and sometimes you can get in between some private pieces or whatever, but they'll have an access someplace in a little parking lot or whatever to get back there. And in a lot of cases, those parking lots are low. Mm-hmm. Where those low parking lots are, and you have access up a valley, I can't tell you how many times the hill right alongside the parking lot, and nobody's going to go up there because they follow the access trail to go straight back, has the biggest buck on the property on it. I found that like 10% of the hilly stuff I hunt has a spot like that where it's right next to the road and they're overlooking, watching the guys in the parking lot. You know, a lot of times if you can go in and then hook back around, a lot of times there's stuff up against the border of the road where you can't access from the road from that area. You know, and really what you got to do with a property like that is take a look at it and like look at the aerial of the topo and say, okay, where does everybody hunt? Okay, and you cross out 80% of that map, and you got 20% left. And now you say, what has suitable habitat for deer to be bedded there? And now you really got one or two spots. And really, most of my public land stuff on the hilly stuff, usually each property has one or two spots I'll hunt, and then I'm off to a different property. Where another guy might dwell on a property and hunt all over that one property, and a lot of it's wasted hunts. You know what I'm saying? I'm seeking out the one spot that'll hold a mature buck there. You know. Right.
So there's a couple things I want to follow up on there, but I want to ask you this question. So once you've decided where you're going to hunt, say you went to a new state and it's just for our purposes, it's hill country or it's swampland, and you've decided it's this parcel. Like, what's your approach to scouting that piece of land? And what, I guess, are you scouting, during the winter? Are you focusing on spring? And what type of sign are you specifically, looking for during those times?
Okay, first off, I scout all year.
Okay.
I'm scouting beds at a certain time of the year to look for them, and that the best time, and I don't talk about this a lot, but the best time overall is in season, because then you see live what's going on now.
Right.
But most of the time we got a tag in our pocket. You know what I mean? So we're not doing that. We're not messing up our hunting. So if you fill your tags, the best time to hunt is right as soon as you get those tags filled, and you go out there and check out those pockets and see what's going on, find the bedding and such. And if not, as soon as you're done hunting is the best time. Now those hills, if they're covered with snow, that's not always the best time. You might have to wait till the snow melts, because a lot of guys don't get it, but you'll see the sign underneath the snow. But the deer will move different and live on the property different when there's a foot of snow on it.
Right.
That makes sense,
Yeah, no, it does. So say you're doing your in-season scouting, are when you're finding rubs and or scrapes, or just sign in general, how are you using that specifically to help inform, your hunting strategies, particularly if you're doing something that you filled your tag late in the season, you're really doing like an off-season scout, say it's this time of year.
Okay.
How much are you using sign from the past, and how much value do you give that if you clearly know it's something from the previous year?
My answer is probably going to differ from a lot of other people's answers. And I think a lot of people get too fixated on rubs and scrapes and stuff, because if you think about what a mature buck does, 90% of his activity is at night, probably 95%, and 5% is during the day. And during the day, they're pretty cautious, so they're not making as much sign as when they're feeling at ease. So most of that sign you're finding is made at night. So most guys are going to go out there and they're going to find a rub cluster or a giant rub or something. They're going to set a stand over the top of it, or they're going to find a rub line right behind a field or something, or even back in the woods. And they're going to think, oh, I got him. What are you doing different than anybody else is? That's what everybody's doing. Is everybody shooting big bucks? The sign to me is only important to tell me that there's a big buck on the property. A rub that's on a 12-inch tree and the rub center is, 40 inches off the ground. Yeah, that's going to catch my attention, but doesn't mean I want to put a stand there. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I know there's one in that area someplace.
Right.
And in some cases, I find sign like that and I don't even hunt it because I determine that I don't even think that buck lives on this property. He's just coming through here at night,
Right. And
there's nothing I can do. So what I need to do is find sign that's close to bedding.
Okay.
Find the rubs that are coming out of a bedding area, or a scrape where two staging areas from a bedding area meet. That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. That'll get my attention. But random rubs and scrapes all over the place, not really.
Okay, so I think that's a good segue, because the one thing I know from following you and reading your articles and following a lot of your videos is that you hunt public land. What I think some folks would consider rather aggressively. And I know that you focus a lot, and you've mentioned it here a couple times in these first couple questions that we've been discussing, that you focus your hunting predominantly on buck bedding. So I guess I think when people hear that, they think, find the buck bedding and then find the buck. And I think it sounds a lot easier than it is, because if it was that easy to do, everyone would set up on a big buck bed and they would kill a big buck every year. So what are the main, what's the key for you to finding mature buck bedding, especially whenever you're talking about public land? Like, what are you looking for that's going to key you in to say you found that rub that caught your attention, right? And now that there's a big buck on the area, so now you want to find his bedding. Like, how are you going about finding that bedding in that area?
The first thing I'm looking for is the overlooked areas, the spots where nobody goes, and then I'm determining what has the best terrain in those areas. Because bedding's all about terrain, terrain and thickness. It's about elevation in hill country, a certain elevation and a certain wind direction, and in lowland, it's about the lowest elevations and the thickest stuff. And where is that where nobody's going? And that's the first stuff I'm going to key in on. And I'm usually, right on it. Like there's an area I scouted with a friend of mine last week. We scouted an area he wanted to look at, and it's probably 3 square miles. We scouted in one day, and I found all the big buck bedding, I'm sure of it.
Wow.
Because we just went straight to the wet stuff and stayed out of the rolling hills and the cornfields and stuff, because there's just crops on this public land over here. I don't even go into that stuff. You're not going to find them. You're going to find sign, but there's no deer there, and that's where everybody hunts. Right. Nobody's going down into that water and wading through stuff that's down their knees, and we're finding the big buck beds and stuff. And really, in these areas, that's where I'm killing them.
Right. So when you're setting up, you're setting up, of course, like when you get there. I think one of the interesting things that I saw in one of your videos was, and I never did this before. Actually, 2 weekends ago, I went out and I scouted. I found a buck bed, and I actually followed your advice from this video. As I actually got in the bed and I crouched down to see what the deer can see. Can you talk a little bit about that approach and what you're really looking for when you do that?
When I go into a buck bed and I look at his bedding area, I like to get in that main bed and take a look around. And if you look at the shape of the bed, usually there's this, it's kind of like banana shaped.
Mm-hmm.
The back is at that rounded side, you know, and in some beds, they'll bed there on any wind direction. So they'll face different directions. They're always facing downwind. I've never seen a buck bed any other way. And I've seen hundreds of deer bed, and I've never seen one not bedded looking downwind. The only time I see them not looking downwind is if something catches their attention and they swivel their head around. They're always looking downwind because they can smell behind them. So if you think about that, if there's one way is open, you know, there's one way where you can see from that bed, I can guarantee you he's bedding there when the wind is blowing from the thick and he's looking at that opening. And that's why a lot of these beds you'll find right on the edge, on the transition line where it's thick, where they can look out while they're smelling behind them. So they're only there on that wind, you know?
Mm-hmm. That's kind of wild, because you just absolutely described like two of the best buck beds I've ever found on our family farm, which are literally sitting on the edge of a bunch of thick stuff on the top of, it's actually on the top of a mountain. Cause I was typically looking for them more, you know, maybe a third of the way down, you know, on a bench, possibly. But they were actually all the way to the top. But of course the thickest stuff was at the top. So that would kind of make sense. So we kind of get a sense of, you know, what you're looking for in a buck bed, you know, and then what you're looking to see. I mean, when you crouch down, you're really looking for their exit routes, right? Like how is he getting to food? How is he getting to additional safer cover? And those are the areas you're really going to try to set up on, right?
Right. Yeah, I do want to, from his bed, you know, look down that exit route and see as far as I can see, because buck's got what I call a safe zone, and a safe zone is if you took an imaginary circle and drew it around that bed, and you say, okay, now if I'm right here, and there's people out here trying to kill me, I know everything that enters this circle. I can see it if it's over there. I can smell it if it's over there. I can hear it if it's over here. I know everything going on in the circle. I feel safe here. I'm going to get up and wander around here with no care in the world until I get to that border. And where that border is what I consider a staging area. And I want to be where they stage on the edge of that safe zone. And I can kind of see that from the bed. I can see where they're going, well, you know, how far they can get. And this time of year is nice because you're going to see a little further now than you are during hunting season. So you're not going to be too close, you know what I mean?
Right.
But I think what a lot of people don't get, and probably a lot of your listeners are going to, you know, raise an eyebrow at this, but a lot of these deer that I kill on public land, and some of them are really big ones, I've watched them step up from their bed and walk to me where I can see them because I'm in cattail cover or whatever. In a lot of cases, I can see those bucks when they get up. And they get up, you know, hour before dark. And by the time they're 75 yards to where I can shoot them, I mean 75 yards, you can almost hit them from where they get up. By the time they get into my shooting range, my window, it's almost closing time.
Right.
What chance does a guy even have if he's hunting that buck and he's 250 yards back?
Yeah.
You don't even have a chance. I mean, he's just hoping that it's the one day that deer gets a bug up its ass and goes for a walkabout, you know?
Right.
And I don't think they do that very much when they're mature.
Right. Yeah. No, you're right. Yep. I mean, so I think, you know, I think one of the things that people get confused by, and I just know, speaking from personal experience, that I've gotten confused by in the past. I'm just making an assumption that others probably have had, you know, a similar encounter or a similar situation. But I've heard you talk about primary bedding versus seasonal buck bedding. Can you kind of give us a description of what those two things are and what defines the two different types of bedding? And I guess just in what might look different about that bedding area in those two scenarios?
You know, I struggle with that a lot, with trying to explain that to people, because it is hard to explain. But primary bedding is going to hold bucks year-round, and usually every buck in the area is bedding into primary bedding. You know, you might go there one day and one buck comes out of there, and you go there a different day and a different buck comes out of there. And it usually holds bucks all year, or at least for the majority of it. Where seasonal bedding, is just what it sounds like. They might be bedded in a position because of doe bedding, so it might be a rut-only bed. They might be bedded in a position because of a food source like corn or acorns or something, and there might be cover that ain't going to be there later in the year. You think about an area in winter. What has cover? Those primary areas are still going to have cover, and those areas hold bucks year round. You get out into some of these spots, and you get out there, say, early season, where you got to wade through water for a mile or two to get out there, right. And you don't see deer, you don't see much sign, but if you do see one, it's usually a giant, big old one.
Right.
Those big bucks will be back there year round. But I go back there and I hunt like the weekend after gun season, and I'll see 50 bucks, and they're all little.
Right.
So they'll hold more bucks, is what I'm trying to get across. At certain times or whatever. But primary bedding is a place where those bucks feel really safe, and I think a mature buck probably has 15 or 20 spots like that. But he's probably got 100 spots that are seasonal,
right?
Maybe more.
It sounds like seasonal, right? Correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't want to misspeak, but it's almost as though primary, if you find a good bedding area that's got great cover, right, and you can kind of look at it and say, I know this is going to have great cover year round. Like that's a pretty solid, affirmation that it's probably going to be a buck bed. It's going to be used no matter what time of year we're talking about. When we're looking at seasonal, you really, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but you're really looking at what are the environmental changes that's going to cause him to want to bed in different places. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it'd probably be different on every property, right? Because one might be getting a lot of pressure, so that those particular group of bucks that call that property home may be looking for denser cover, and that might be, right. Seasonal. Or you might be on a property that doesn't have a lot of pressure, and you have a lot of natural food and food for them in the timber, whether it's acorns or whatever the case might be. So they might bed further out away from cover during those times of year just to be closer to the food source. So it sounds like it's almost like you have to really put your woodsmanship to work to figure out how the bedding is going to change.
To some degree, but it's kind of like being a detective. You get that bedding area and you got to look at it and say, okay, why are they bedding here? What's the reasoning? And sometimes you're going to be wrong, and sometimes you're going to be right. But the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. And you might get to a point where you can be pretty accurate with it. Obviously, I still make mistakes at it. Right. It's not a game of perfection. But I can think of like some points. I mean, they look great, and you think, oh man, there's going to be a buck bedded here. This is going to be primary bedding. And I get in there and I don't see a buck, and it turns out, you find out after a couple of years of hunting it, that they're really there only in early season when the acorns are dropping.
Right.
But it looked to me like it was primary, but I'm not a deer.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, I mean, some of it you gotta throw some stands at it. I got kind of a rule that if I got any question about something, I throw 3 stands at it. And what I mean by that is I throw one in there early season, I throw one in there in rut, I throw one in there in late season, and see what happens. Sometimes you can get these stands where that every year, like the first weekend in October, there's going to be a buck bedded in this area. That's seasonal.
Right.
But you go in there, mid-September, or you go in there, towards rut, and it's a ghost town.
Right. That was I'm sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, I was going to say that you actually just made a perfect segue into like the next thing that I was thinking was that we were talking about primary and seasonal bedding, and I was just wondering if in your years of experience, have you found any corollaries between times of season and bedding? So, for example, have you found any things to be somewhat consistent for you or a pattern for you that bucks like this type of thing in early season? I've found on the average, and then for the October lull, I've found them to like this type of area or this type of bedding during this type of season. Have you gotten to the point to where you found like any of these similarities season over season, during the different sections of the season?
Oh well, I guess in a way, I mean, I found bedding that you figure out that it only comes in every 2 years, and it takes you a while to figure that out. Well, it's because corn is only planted there every 2 years, and they're bedding there, in October, and that guy always leaves his corn standing,
Right.
That kind of thing, or rut bedding, they're going to be there during the rut.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I have seen a correlation with that was a little off topic, but is if you see a lot of rubs around the bedding, it's probably used around rut time or just pre-rut. Some of my best bedding areas don't even have any rubs around them, where there's low densities and stuff. But usually if you get a lot of big rubs around a bed, like from a big buck where they're real high, if he's rubbing around a bedding area that aggressively, it's probably a rut bed.
All right. That's interesting. I've run into a couple, because I've always kind of thought, and this is just, just guessing here. I've always wondered how much, let me rephrase this. When I'm looking at buck bedding, do you give any credence to how busy the rub line is in that particular area? And I'm wording this really poorly, and I'm sorry, my brain just completely went on me. But whenever you find a bed, are you enamored with something that has a ton of rubs around it, or are you more interested in something that has like sparse rubs around it that tells you maybe he's using that during moving through that area during daylight?
What I find is like most of the pressured stuff I hunt. Now this changes if I get onto like Entree's managed farm.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm on public land, what I'm finding is mature bucks don't usually have a lot of bedding or rubbing around their beds. They usually don't have rub lines coming in and out of it. The rubbing usually starts out further. It's like they don't mark up their bedding areas. When I do find a lot of rubbing around a bedding area, it's usually got 2-year-olds in it that are doing that.
Okay.
They are very aggressive and rub a lot. But when they start getting to like 4 years older and older, I don't find a lot of rubs in there. Every now and then you'll find 1 or 2 around the bedding area, especially if it's a primary bedding area. But it's like the marking ain't real extreme. And I think that fools a lot of people. They go in there and there's no sign of a deer here. Well, one big buck ain't going to leave a lot of sign,
Right. No, that's a good point.
I think too, you got to remember too that I think that when there's rubbing around a bedding area, it's because you're competing. I think all rubs are competing. When they rub, they're marking something. And when they rub around a bedding area, it's because they're competing for those beds. And if you get low densities and you got a mature buck, ain't no buck going to come bedding anywhere near him if he's the kingpin. So if he hangs in that area, a lot of times there won't be rubbing. In one case in point, there's a spot near here I hunt. It's actually the one spot that I hunt that's private. It's my buddy's farm. It's 70 acres because it's surrounded by heavy pressure. And it's actually harder to kill a buck there than it is on the public because it's so small and open.
Right.
But he's got one primary bedding area there. And we've been hunting that for, I think it's 25 years now.
Wow.
And when we first started hunting that bedding area would be rubbed up a lot. And then they had the CWD thing where they kill a lot of deer, and the population went way down. And now you couldn't buy a rub in there, but that's still where the biggest bucks in their bed. Every time we see one, that's where it comes. And every year we see several big bucks. This year too, come in and out of there, and the rubs just aren't there. But they're bedding there.
That's interesting. So it's the older,
and that's primary bedding.
Right. The older the deer, the wiser he gets. He doesn't want to leave any evidence at the scene of the crime.
and I might have overstated that, but so many of your listeners are so focused on sign that they want to see that rub to have the confidence to hunt there, and they got to find their confidence somehow else because that's not always going to be there. And if you go in there, you look, and there's no rubs, and you move on to the next one, you might be hunting the spots that got the 2-year-olds because they're the ones rubbing.
Right. I think you're 100% correct because, I definitely will admit that, there was a time where that was an approach that I took, and I think a lot of folks when they go out, just want to see deer. So they try to put themselves in a position where they're just going to see numbers, right? And they can go back to camp or back to their buddies and say, I saw 10 deer tonight, or I saw 8 deer, or however many it happens to be. I think your success changes when you start looking, to your point, for the right sign, and you're not necessarily looking for all the deer, you're looking for the right one to come by. And so, what I've found is that I've definitely had more sits where I've seen fewer deer, but in this past year, I've actually had more sits where I saw the right deer.
Right.
You know, which, when that light bulb kind of goes off and you start to have those experiences, it's, I mean, you just get hungry for it. You know what I mean? It's like the sits are just so much more enjoyable because I know when I'm set up, if I did all my homework right, it's if I do see something, it's going to be one that I might have an opportunity at, which I think is, in my opinion, is more exciting than seeing numbers of deer. But one of the things I want to ask you about, and I've watched you or listened to you talk about this a couple of different times, and it's really interesting because I think it's also one of the hardest things to play, or one of the hardest things to kind of, I don't want to say figure out because I don't think you ever fully figured it out, but how to manage it, if you will. But that's working with the wind. And so what I wanted to kind of know is, do you find that bucks are working wind differently on approach versus exit bedding, or maybe if we break it down even further, like morning versus evening in a bedding area?
Absolutely. Morning is way different than evening. And what I'm seeing is that when bucks go into bedding, they're paranoid of it. They circle downwind, no matter which way they came from, and they walk nose to wind straight to that bed. Get to the bed, turn around, and they watch their back trail with the wind to their back. So they're watching the trail they came in on, and that's pretty much almost every time they bed. But when they leave a bed, they get up and they go from point A to point B, and regardless of the wind. And the only thing I see in regards to the wind when they move away in the evening is that if they're going into an area they can't smell, they go a little slower. They hold up a little bit, at that staging area a little longer, kind of thing. And I think a lot of people think that those deer got to have that wind in their nose to come out of that bedding area, and they don't. I've killed plenty that have the wind blowing right in my face when they get up out of the bed and come to me. But coming in the morning, it's really hard to kill those bucks in the bedding areas because they J-hook in. Mm-hmm. They come around and they get to a certain point and they hook into there. And that's going to change daily. So you're not really going to see a heavy trail or something where they come in. So when you see trails around bedding, and you see trails going to or from the bedding or whatever, mm-hmm. they're going from the bedding. Those are the ones where he's leaving. That's where he's leaving a trail because he's going the same route every time. That's why I like hunting bedding in the evening more. In the morning, I try to cut them off at a funnel just before the bedding. And the thing is, too, in the morning, I've tried a few times to get right over the top of a bed and kill these things. And I've had a little bit of success with it. But there's always the times when them things get back to their beds an hour or two before daylight. And if they get in there and they wander around in the dark and you can't see them, even if you're in the tree, you can't kill them. They're going to get your wind. They're going to catch something. I mean, they're masters at busting you. They're going to find out you're there and booger out of there, and you just ruined your hunt. That's not to say I don't make my attempts at morning hunts. I do. But it's not easy except for rut. Now, rut, they come back to the bedding later. That's the exception. But that early season and late season, they're getting to those beds before daylight a lot.
Right.
But they still leave in daylight. But when they come in, to get back to your question, because I went off on a tantrum again, when they come in the morning, they're coming in wind to nose. When they leave, don't matter.
So do you give any credence? Because the one thing you said is when they're leaving, you've had the wind in your face and a buck come right to you. Are you of the, follow the school of thought, because I've heard some guys talk about, angling wind or crossed winds, or you have to give the deer the wind at some point to make him comfortable enough to move. Do you kind of fall into that same school of thought to where it's like you're going to need, say it's an evening hunt, he's going to exit a bed a certain way. Do you kind of go in knowing that you're going to have to partially give that deer the wind to make him comfortable enough to come out of his bedding in that direction?
Kinda. My point of view is if the deer is bedding there for a certain wind and his exit's going into that wind, you got to hunt upwind of him, right? Mm-hmm. Or you ain't going to kill him. Or when you do hunt there, he's not going to be bedded there because the wind's in your face, right? So if he's only bedded there when the wind's coming down and he's going that direction and you have to hunt over there, you have to hunt with a just off wind.
Right.
So I'm getting on the side of the wind that's blowing one way, and that's part of the whole mobile thing too. Hunting mobile is you have to, be able to take your stand and move to the tree you need to be in for the wind of the day. I'm actually, when I'm going into those spots, even though, I may have gone in there and looked at trees already in the spring or whatever, I'm not locking myself into a tree because I don't know what the wind's going to be that day. So as I'm getting up there, I'm actually checking the wind with milkweed, and I'm not doing it at my truck, and I'm not doing it with the weather station because it changes in terrain, from 100 yards. It'll be different. So as I'm getting up there, I'm checking with milkweed and seeing what the wind's doing. And you have to have it a little bit off. You can't be, off by 10 feet or something because you get a little drift over.
Mm-hmm.
But you get a just off wind where he's coming around into the wind and maybe he feels perfectly safe.
Right.
But you got the wind to your favor actually because it's blowing off to the side.
Right. So how are you factoring in, thermals for this type of hunt? And I guess maybe let's back up like even a step further and just because I've heard you talk about this piece as well. Can you just kind of give us a quick high level explanation of what thermals are and how they work? And then I guess let's talk about how you factor that into whenever you're setting up, with the prevailing wind versus the thermal.
Okay. Well, what a thermal is when ground or water either heats or cools from either the sun shining on it or the sun going over a hill. And when the ground or water changes temperature, it affects the air above it and makes the air move. And what happens is when the sun is shining on dirt, the dirt will get warm, and that'll warm the air right above it, and warm air will expand, and it causes it to rise, sucking in air from below it or whatever. So in hill country, when you get a valley warming up and air rising and wind coming over a hill, the wind coming over the top of the hill is going to create a little bit of a vacuum and suck the stagnant air into the current up the hill, right? So it's going to actually take those thermals and pull them to the hillside, and you'll have a wind that blows up that hill. And it might sound like, well, it would barely be an air drift, but anybody who's hunted and gotten steep hills can tell you, you stand on a steep hill, it's almost like a heavy blowing wind at your back on a hot day.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is when the sun goes over the hill and a shadow casts across that valley, the ground will start cooling, and the opposite effect will happen, and all of a sudden that air will start rushing back down. And your wind's going to change 180 in hill country if you're hunting that leeward side. I guess either side. Your wind's going to change from going uphill to downhill, as that shadow comes off, or from shadow to sunlight. So now the other kind of thermal is the water thermal. And water thermals, like in swamps or with shallow ponds, the water will heat up like bathtub water, especially if it's shallow water. And it'll stay warm when the sun goes over the horizon, and that'll suck your scent up to the pond or to the water, and then it'll rise. So if you you can have a certain wind, but if you set up in between the water and you have the deer walking in between you and the water, you're going to get gusts of wind that direction. It's not nearly as potent as the ground thermals in hill country, but as soon as you get a calm spot, you'll see the wind pulling to the water.
Right. I wouldn't say necessarily my first, but whenever I finally understood thermals, I won't say fully understood, but began to understand how to work with them. It was a video that you actually did where you were using milkweed sitting in your stand, tossing out over this little body of water to show how the thermal was working, because it literally sucked the milkweed right out to the body of water, and as soon as it hit the body of water, it went straight up in the air.
That must have been that pond one, right?
Yeah, it was
the pond. Fun with that.
Yeah, it was the pond one. But it's interesting that because everyone always takes some type of wind device into the woods, right? It's usually like some type of talcum powder or something like that they're blowing, and then I watched that, and you're using milkweed. Can you kind of describe why you use milkweed and I guess the value you get out of it?
Milkweed is the greatest free tool you'll ever get. I have it with me at all times. And the value is, I mean, you take talcum powder, and if it's dead calm, it's dead calm, right?
Right.
You drop milkweed, and you're going to see where the air is going, regardless of it being calm. You're going to see where your scent stream's going, because it's going to go wherever that milkweed goes. And I use that stuff all the time, and you can drop it, and if it hits that deer smells you. I mean, I can watch it hit a spot, and when the deer gets to it, he blows. Or like this year, I had a deer coming out, and he was in that just off wind, and the wind was shifting and blowing like straight at him. So I kept dropping the milkweed, and it was just missing him. And that thing never smelled me. It walked right past. But if you see a curve to him, he gets you. And what is cool about it too is with talcum powder or a string or something, you're not going to see what the wind's doing 20 feet from you. And you'd be amazed at how much it turns, how it follows the terrain, how it goes around obstacles. And not only does it, show you what it's doing now, but after you use it a year or two, you start seeing trends. Mm-hmm. And you can start seeing how you can set up upwind of a deer because of what the wind does around obstacles and around trees and around hills. Because you've learned some things about wind flow just from watching this stuff.
Right. It's almost like a wind map playing out in front of you. When you walk.
And that stuff is so cool and works so great that you just can't get that point across talking about it. Guys got to try it. I mean, I would urge everybody that's listening that has access to milkweed to try it.
I think Dan Enfelt should package it up and sell Dan Enfelt milkweed. Big business opportunity right there. Probably see you ATA next year with that. But so the one thing, excuse me, I wanted to kind of ask you, because I'm always curious to see how folks kind of plan their hunts, and I'm just curious to know, is there anything that you help determine what days or times are best to go out and hunt? Like, are you following the moon at all? Are you following barometric pressure, wind speed? Do you have any theories around some of those factors that you follow?
I pay attention to all that stuff. But I hunt every day. Every chance I get. I might go, a month long and hunt every single day. But if it's rut and I'm hunting cruising areas, I'm making sure that I'm out there when that moon is overhead or underfoot. I've seen too many deer moving around that time period to rule that it's coincidental. I don't know how to explain it, but, I used to keep charts of everything I saw. And if you went and looked at the moon chart, you sit all day, on a, 5-day hunt or something, you sit all day every day. And 90% of the deer are at the moon times, and the moon time's changing every day. Hmm. That's not coincidental, So, yeah, I pay attention to that stuff, but I'm hunting out there regardless. So, what I do think you get out of it too is, like, say you got that deer that just won't get far enough from bedding, and you're watching him from an observation stand, and he's not getting to where you need him to get to kill. It takes that that day that's really cold in winter, mm-hmm. or the day that you got a drastic barometer change, or it takes that moon being directly overhead right in the last hour of the day. And he might only get 20 yards further. But that's where you can get an arrow.
Right. So you mentioned something there that I wanted to follow up on, which was observation sets. I think me from personal experience, I had a hard time, I guess, when I was younger in seeing the value in them, I guess. A lot of guys mm-hmm. and girls who are out there listening, it's, for me, it's the work full-time job. I'm a dad, so when I get an opportunity to go out and hunt, I usually want to go hunt, and it's hard for me to give up a day of just saying I'm going to sit to watch, but what I have found is that as I started doing it, the days I was hunting became better hunting days versus, just going in and kind of winging it. So I guess, right. How often are you sitting for observation versus, what we would call, quote unquote, a killing stand before moving in, tight to a bedding area to try to get your shot?
I would say probably about 20-25% of my hunts are full-blown observation sets. But you might increase that to 30-35%, where a lot of them are half kill, half observation, where I'm in a spot where I got a good opportunity to kill something, but I can also see some other stuff. So I'm getting into positions where I can obviously watch things. And like you said, I see that over and over again. Young guys or guys ain't got a lot under their belts yet. They see too much value in their hunting time because they're not getting results. Well, they're not getting results because of the way they're hunting. They need to change something up. And that one day of watching can be a world of difference. I mean, you can bumble in there and take a guess, and you're wrong. What do you do the next day?
Right. Not only that, but
back.
No, I was just going to say,
and watch, and then the next day move in and kill him right where he was.
Right, and that one day that you went in with, without a whole lot of information, you likely, busted up the area you'd really like to be hunting anyway.
Right, and what you don't know is it can hurt you. That buck might get up from some place where he could watch you, access, or or that kind of thing.
Right. So I'm always curious to know, how much information from those observation sets are you trying to gather before you feel comfortable in making a move? Because I know that just reading your writings and listening to you and watching your videos and stuff, that you're fairly aggressive. So how much, data or intel do you need to feel comfortable making a move?
No, I make a move usually right away.
Really?
I gotta have the same window. I mean, if you're watching them and they're moving on a west wind, go in there on the next day and it's a south wind. It could be a whole different ballgame.
Right.
So you want to see that you're going to have consecutive similar days, right? But their patterns change so fast it might change by the day you go in. But
Right.
You're still better off sitting back and then making a move. I probably successful on about 25% of the moves I make. Maybe it's 20. Maybe it's 1 out of 5. 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 5 of the moves that I make from an observation stand to the kill stand, I kill the deer. And to some people, it's like, well, you're not even killing them. But really, how many hunts have you been on where you got a 1 in 5 chance of killing the buck you're after?
I would take those odds just about every year. Me personally, it's I would certainly take those odds. So you mentioned wind direction, and I think that's key. Obviously, it's like making sure you're likely going to get similar, I should say, movement or reaction or behavior, I guess you could call it, if you're using the same wind. So one of the questions, to help you kind of identify any of these things, because I know you do a lot of boots on the ground scouting. Are you ever using game cameras to kind of help you determine when to move in for a shot, or are you strictly using observation sets? And I guess, how much do you use game cameras?
I do use game cameras. I'm kind of careful about where I use them. A lot of the places I hunt are pretty heavy pressured, and it would just be missing when I went back out there.
Right.
So I am hunting, the last couple of years I've been hunting a conservancy where you got to draw for hunts. You draw for an area. And that area is pretty safe to have a camera in. And I use cameras there. I take my regular trail cameras and I put them up on high dry ground around main trails, around feeding areas and stuff, and in funnels. And I try to get nighttime pictures of deer moving through so I know where about a big buck is. What's living back there, basically. Like this year, for instance, I dropped a couple cameras out, and we caught about a 145-inch 10-pointer, and about maybe half a dozen Pope and Youngs that were a little smaller.
Right.
Then one of the guys spotted this giant out there. It was supposedly a 200-incher, and we dropped a game camera right on his bed. He saw it get up from his bed, and I went in there and hunted over the bed. And I put a camera in there that emails you the picture.
Right.
And then I left it alone. And then we waited for that buck to come back and hunted that buck. And then at the end of the season, when that buck turned out to not really be real, it was like a 160-inch buck.
Right. I still wouldn't turn my nose up at that.
Right, but it was supposedly a 200-incher, and I was hunting this 200-incher that everybody was seeing.
Right.
And passed that buck.
Right.
So it was kind of a little bit of a downer.
Right.
But when I blew all my opportunities because of that, and what happened was that the guy who was giving me all this information got the buck on film and showed me the footage, and I realized what was going on.
Right.
So I had a couple days left. I used that game camera information to run back out to the other end of the swamp, 2 miles back in, and shoot the other buck, the 145-inch 10.
Not a bad consolation prize, for sure.
Right. But I knew what was going on in that swamp where I wasn't at the times because of these cameras. But I was putting them in places, and this is key, where I'm not going to alarm those bucks. It's up on dry land, where those bucks are used to people walking and stuff. And I can tell you something else, too. There's this young guy that was hunting back there, and he drew September, October, November, gun season, and muzzleloader season, and all I drew was November. So I had 3 weeks until gun season started. I had 3 weeks to hunt back there, and I think I saw from stand probably about 7 or 8 Pope and Young bucks in those 3 weeks. Nice. That kid saw one Pope and Young buck the whole season, hunting almost every day, aggressively. Wow. And the only difference was, I mean, a lot of times he was hunting 100 yards from me. He was hunting dry land, and he had a tree stand that was limiting him from hunting in them swamps and stuff where I was. I was hanging over the top of those bedding areas, hanging in those observation spots where I can see into the swamps and then making a move. And I wasn't very far from him at all, and I was seeing bucks constantly. And all I could hear from him is, "This is a nursery. All there is little crap." And I was hardly seeing any little crap. You know?
What? So I know that you like to hunt mobile. Do you prefer a climber, or do you prefer a hang on with sticks? What's your preference?
I prefer, for hunting wise, a hang on and sticks. I actually this year I made my own setup. I made my own tree stand, and I made my own sticks to my specs. And I got a lightweight stand that's 6 pounds, and I have some sticks that are, I can't remember what the weight is, but they're less than the lone wolf sticks. And I take 5 out on the back of the stand, and I can get up 20, 25 feet, and the thing's silent. So,
and between the milkweed and your stand, I think we're going to see Dan Enfeld at ATA next year with his signature line.
There's a few people urging me to sell his stand, but we'll
right.
see.
Well, hey, you got a willing prototype tester right here that you're talking to. So, one of the things I wanted to mention or ask you also is I've also heard you talk about, some of that, mistakes some folks make is that going into an area, doing their scouting, hanging a stand, and then bolting out of there, and then hanging that set to come in, at a later date to hunt. And that you typically like to go in, hang and hunt the same day. So can you talk about
the old cool off period?
Right. Can you talk about that approach and how that's helped you take mature bucks?
Yeah. If you took away first time sits, you could probably take away half my wall.
Wow.
They're that important. That mobile moving in and killing the first day is important for many reasons. I mean, if a deer smells you've been there, he's going to change his pattern. He's going to leave. And a lot of guys get the idea that they can fool a deer's nose because there's a lot of misleading advertising out there.
Right.
And you cannot fool a deer's nose. They're going to smell you've been there. Less scent, more scent, doesn't matter. They're going to smell that you've been there. It doesn't matter if a little of you was there or a lot of you was there. You were there. And when you get close to a bedding area, it ain't like getting close to, a deer in a woodlot or something. I've had, deer walk right across my trail or right up my tracks in a woodlot or something at night or where they'd feel okay with it. You get near their bedding area, that's their safe area. That's what they're paranoid about people there. So when they smell you there, they freak out. So you need to get in there without getting smelt. And you know, we try our best to get some sort of golden access where you got some deadfall or something you hunt up against where they're never going to walk on that side. But, you know, they always seem to figure out that you've been there. It's like they know what goes on around their bedding area. And getting in there and getting it done the first day is important. I think you damage those bedding areas every time you go in there, even when you scout in spring. I think it freaks them out if they come back and they smell that you've been in there. But they'll forget about it. They'll be okay with it if you're in there once or twice because, you know, a coyote will run through there or whatever.
Right.
But you certainly don't want to hang out there. And that's another thing that we didn't even talk about is these bedding areas. I don't think there's a spot that I've hunted over 3 times any given year in the last 5 years.
Wow.
You know, and I know some killer spots. I don't go back to them. You hunt them once or twice and you're done with them.
Right. So let's talk about that. That's a good thing to dive into. It's, you know, what's your approach to hunting those bedding areas? Do you have like a golden number that you won't break that threshold for sits, and how much of a cool off period do you think they need between hunts?
Once I know a bedding area really well, I usually just hunt once a year. When I know that the bucks are using it. And sometimes I try to monitor from a distance, like from a observation stand or something before I even go in. But if I don't know a bedding area, I throw the 3-stand rule that we discussed earlier, where I throw a stand on an early season, rut, and late season, or I'll throw a stand on it on the date I figure from my scouting that they're using it. Like if I think it's a seasonal stand for this time of the year, I'm going in there at that time of the year and see what happens.
Right.
You know.
Okay. So I know that we've kept you here just about an hour, but before we let you go, Phil, do you have I know we covered a lot of information, but do you have anything at the top of your mind that you're burning to ask?
Yeah, actually, I've been thinking about this, and I mean, Dan, you're a monster out there. Like, you get out there day in and day out, which is awesome. And I think Clint and I would both agree when I say you're almost living the dream with the ability to get out that often. But from the perspective of, like, say, somebody, you know, who's working and really has limited time to get out at all during the season. And I know it often depends on what time of the season you're getting out, but let's just say second season, like after rifle and kind of like into January. Let's just say like right about now. What are the 3 things, aside from doing your topo research? What are the 3 things that you would tell somebody who literally has maybe 1 or 2 days over the span of 2 weeks to get out? Like, what would you tell them to look for in order to up their odds of a fairly successful hunt?
You know, I don't know about if you get further south, but up here in the north, what I'd be looking for right now at this time of the year, if you just had a few times to get out, would be for food sources. You know, at this time of the year,
right?
And I'm still hunting bedding, but a whole property can be dead if there's no food there. You got to be on the property where the deer are. You know what I mean?
Right.
They really, you know, in the north here, they really change in wintertime. You know, I think we're closed now. We're either our season closed or it's about to. I've been tagged out for a while, so I haven't been paying attention.
Yeah, that's a
this
bummer.
time of the year, I actually do pretty well if I have a tag at this time of the year. The deer in wintertime are more patternable than any other time of the year, and this is when observation stands really shine, because you can see forever and stuff, and those deer are so focused on food that they're bedding close, and you set up and you watch where they come in and stuff, and you look for that vulnerable spot, and then you move in for the kill, and you know, it's golden, and everybody else seems to just bumble in there and mess it up, you know. But
so is that what you would call maybe like a midday move? Like, would you set up, observe, and then move later before evening?
I would set up and observe, and usually the deer come out in the evening and they stay there till after dark. So the next day I'd come back. And like I said, at this time of the year, they're real patternable.
Right.
I think it's with the cold, they got to put on a lot of food or something. They just hit that same food source and same bed every day after day after day, you know?
Yeah. I went out and did over Christmas. I always kind of, you know, I'm lucky work actually closes for the weekend between Christmas and and New Year's. So I actually get out for a couple days back at our family farm. That's usually when I do a lot of the hunting back there because I'm off and don't have to take any extra time off from work. And I've actually found it to be one of my favorite times. Now it's after rifle season, so there's been plenty of pressure around, but you're 100% right, Dan. It's like they've become a lot more patternable. And the other thing I've noticed too is I'm able to kind of see what they've been using all year. You know what I mean? Like if I just pay attention as I'm walking in, I can kind of see, especially if I have a food source, I can kind of see how they're getting to that food source. And that was exactly what I did. And, the guys that hunted that property all year long struggled to see any shooters this year. And I did, I did 3 sets over Christmas and I saw 3 shooters. I didn't get anything within range. I was just slightly outside of getting a shot opportunity. But I guess I kind of hunted smart and I read the sign that I had and figured out where I needed to be. And sure enough, there they were. But I did get busted. That's what kind of blew me up. I had a wind that was an off wind, like you were talking about. I did not have my milkweed, so I will blame that. I guarantee you, if I would have had milkweed, that doe that blew up my spot for the rest of the evening, she hit a spot where she just came to a dead stop. She was coming, and there was a group of deer the night before, and that had a couple bucks and a couple shooters, and I moved my stand just a little bit closer after that observation set to get in a little bit closer. And sure enough, here they all came. And I'm pretty sure my wind was hitting that spot because she came to that one point and just came to a dead stop and just stood there and wouldn't come any further. And then didn't spook, but just turned around and, after about 5 minutes of kind of checking out the area, turned around and calmly went the other way. And then I knew it was pretty much done then at that point. But I know we've kept you here for a little while, and I want to be sensitive to your time, of course. But what I always like to do is kind of end everything on a story from our guests. So, like, if you wouldn't mind, take us on a hunt with Dan Enfalt, and let us know what your most memorable hunt is. It can be a harvest, it could be just the one that got away, but give us every detail. Let us know what state you're hunting in, and give us all the dirt all the way back to the tailgate.
Oh, geez. I got a million of them.
I know, right?
Don't brag.
Sounds like we might have to have you back on then.
All right. There's one buck that I hunted quite a while back. It's still my biggest scoring kill. It's in the mid-180s. I saw that buck out glassing on a sleepless night in July. I went out glassing in the middle of the night with a spotlight, which is illegal here.
Right.
It's probably not in a lot of places where your listeners are, but I saw this buck. It was just huge from the side of the road in an area where I hunt. And so then as August got into where it started getting close to September where I could hunt, I was glassing to where I thought this thing was coming from. It was all open areas. And I finally was able to find this thing coming out of this little square woodlot. And then I finally went over there and tried to hunt it on opening day. And a whole bunch of people had gotten in there that worked on the farm that had joined it. They saw the tracks and stuff and spooked them out of there. And I ended up having a hard time refining him. And that spring, I found his bed, and his shed antler was laying right in it. And that bed was under a willow tree, and it was worn into the ground, but it was a singular bed, which is rare because those big bucks usually bed in areas where there's several beds. Mm-hmm. But there wasn't any rubs around or scrapes or anything, so I was a little leery of it. But that fall, I could get into a position in a tree where I could actually glass into that bed, and I could see the buck in that bed several times. And I started watching and paying attention, and every time it was a west wind, that buck was in that bed. But it was a really open area, grassy, wet, and you couldn't get close. And there's no trees around, there's just sparse willow trees and a tree here or there. So I was sitting way back, and you couldn't get this thing to move far enough. And I played cat and mouse with him all year. And the next year, he was back in that same bed. And almost every time there's a west wind, he'd be in there. And it was driving me nuts all season watching this thing. And I had this idea that what if the wind would change, And I was waiting for the wind to change while he was bedded there, because it's really so far to go to get to another bedding area. I mean, it's just open grass and stuff that I didn't think this deer in that area would get up in broad daylight and walk that kind of distance. And it was Thanksgiving Day at like 10 or 11 in the morning, the wind changed to 180. It was coming out of the east as the front moved in. And I grabbed my shotgun. It was gun season. And I strapped that thing to my back with bungee cords. And I crawled up to that thing's bed with a little patch of cattails in front of me, on my hands and knees, not even knowing for sure if he was there. And when I got to 25 yards from the bed, I unbungeed the shotgun and rose up to my knees and found myself staring at this thing eyeball to eyeball and shot him right in his bed. And I thought that was, even though it's a gun kill, that was one of my most memorable hunts.
Man, that's some guerrilla tactics right there. I like that one. I would probably put that one up there as one of my favorite too. Because how often do you? I mean, how hard is it to even just do a stalk, just in general, right? But me, personally, I think the bungee cord actually makes the story.
You know what? I never had the confidence before that to ever stalk him with the bow.
Right.
But where I stalked it with that shotgun was easy bow range. And I was thinking I could have did this any time during the year. That started to hit me as maybe I got to be more confident with the with the bow.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, with that stock move you put on, I mean, as close as you got, you definitely had an opportunity with the bow. But
hey, Dan, right now I'm looking at a picture of that 180 buck. Well played, sir. Well played.
Right. So Dan, I just want to say thanks for coming on and spending some time with us. As I'd mentioned, I'd been looking forward to it. I know we've been, IMing back and forth on Facebook and stuff like that, trying to get some time together. I do appreciate you coming on. But before we let you go, is there anything you want to mention? Anywhere anyone can find more information about Dan Enfalt, some of the information you have? Any place online you'd like to direct people?
Yeah, they should probably come to my website, huntandbeast.com. It's a forum where we discuss tactics in detail and stuff. And there's some really good stuff on there, some information and stuff for people looking for that kind of thing. And I also sell videos that are not like hunting videos. They're tactical videos on how to do what we're doing and, shows how to read maps and all that kind of stuff. And they're terrain-based, so like I have one about swamp hunting, one about hill hunting, and so forth.
Yeah, I would recommend anyone out there listening to cruise over to your site and check it out. It's one of those places where that I find refreshing to go visit. One, because everyone there they're diehards that follow you, and the folks who are actually on the forum as well are super knowledgeable. You know what I mean? So it's like you can actually go there and have a conversation with just the people who are on there chatting, and those folks have a ton of information to share, as well as some very experienced and knowledgeable hunters to interact with. So I absolutely suggest everyone cruise over there. Also, I'll place all the details of how you can find Dan, on social media and the website and the blog post show notes as well. But Dan, thanks for your time. I do appreciate you hopping on, and I'll let you go ahead and get going back to your the rest of your evening. But thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. We'd just like to thank Dan for joining us. Be sure to head over to his website, huntingbeast.com, and check out all the content that is there, his DVDs that he has for sale. And make sure to check out the forum. There's a ton of great information there, a bunch of great people who follow Dan. They're able to also provide great hunting information, strategies, and so forth. So do yourself a favor and check that out. Also want to make sure that we thank our partners at Exodus Outdoor Gear and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And also want to thank all of you who are tuning in every other week to listen to us talk deer hunting. We're very much appreciative of that. If you're enjoying the content that we're putting out there, be sure to leave us a 5-star iTunes rating. We'd be very much appreciative of that as well. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can find us and subscribe to us via iTunes, Stitcher, and then, of course, you can find us also on Google Play. And until next time, we will see you all.